Hello everyone and welcome to our webinar today, How to Write a Business Case. Our presenter is Nicole Nash-Arnold. Nicole is a nursing career coach who helps great nurses transform into respected leaders. She shares her 15 years of experience in both senior and executive health leadership roles to germinate great leadership. Clinically, Nicole has over 10 years perioperative experience before moving into her nurse educator and management roles. She has postgraduate qualifications in perioperative nursing and currently a master's in nursing. Nicole is a member of the International Coaches Federation. Welcome to the microphone, Nicole.
Thank you very much, Sue. Right, so here we are getting into how to write a business case. And it's important to know that this is part of a couple of webinars really that I've already done because it refers to some of the content of the other elements. We've already looked at organising change, and when we did that we looked at project management. So when you come up with a great idea for your environment, your ward, your health service, and how you might organise that change is really about what project management is, to take it from what is a great idea that's really going to benefit your patients to executing it and it already being well adopted into your health service delivery setting. And we've also taken an in-depth look at the managing of the impact of that change. When you do take something from a very conceptual idea and implement that change, then it can be very impactful, not just in your environment, but also to a lot of people around you. And so we did that when we looked at change management and how that looked. Now we're going to have a look at how you get this ball rolling. And that requires not just looking at clinical and patient outcomes. And that's probably the most important thing about when we start thinking about a business case, because as nurses, it doesn't intuitively feel like it's something that we need to be thinking about. But actually, when we are nurses, we tend to think about clinical outcomes, patient outcomes, and what it means for us. But this is something that's quite different. This requires us speaking in everybody's language, irrespective of where you come from and what you do. We nurses can talk to each other till we're blue in the face about the nursing impact of evidence-based project in your niche of your clinical specialty. And we can talk about it very comfortably with the multidisciplinary team. You can talk to the physiotherapists and the social workers and the doctors and any number of people in and around our multidisciplinary team. But the facts are also is that all wards and all clinical departments are also talking about the same thing. They've all got good ideas and they've all got best practice concepts and they've all got evidence-based projects and methodologies that they want to implement. If your idea, for example, is going to have a drastically improved patient outcome for your niche of your case mix, but requires one extra nurse a year, then that's one concept. But there's also the fact that theatre might have another idea that's evidence-based, it's best practice, it has excellent clinical outcomes, but their system and their idea is going to take 3 extra nurses. And actually, ICU have come up with a piece of technology that will save a nurse's wage for a year, but it's going to cost $250,000 in capital expenditure. And when you think about it, medical records are going to need a revolutionised system for how they are going to do their core business with the electronic medical record coming along. So their revolutionised technology requires an implementation cost of $1.2 million and enormous staffing needs to execute it. And then you kind of get the idea that in a hospital or in a health service, everybody has got ideas. And one of the questions about when you're writing a business case to argue the best thing for your ward is, how do you stand out from the crowd? Consider for a moment you're the director of nursing and you've got all of your nursing teams. You've got health records, you've got the ICU, you've got theatre, and you've got you coming to you with all excellent ideas. How do you know, how can she make the decision about which one is a good idea and which one is not a good idea? If you take that concept one step further, is at least the Director of Nursing understands that the electronic medical record is going to have wide-reaching benefits and the staff in ICU are not going to have to transcribe or interpret the word warfarin that actually looks more like SOMAC, and that we're going to have connectivity across the entire hospital and a much better medical record. The Director of Nursing has a broad understanding about making those links between the impact and the argument and the idea and the patient change. But what about a hospital board? A hospital board is generally made up of people who were Telstra executives and heads of a not-for-profit overseas, or they were litigation lawyers in a very diverse field. And when you come to them with an idea that's going to improve patient care, then, and particularly they have no idea about patient outcomes, no idea, and think that the word telemetry is something they heard in the Formula One car last night when they watched it. So this is what we do in a business case. We cover those problems, and in a business case, we make apples and oranges comparable through a business case. And we flatten language so that it can be consumable for any background in a business case. And we get people to cough up cold hard cash by making an argument and winning that argument. This is the nuts and bolts of how we might go about doing that. So when we think about this sort of thing, as usual when I do one of these presentations, I'm going to base it around a hypothetical nursing example and how you might use that to implement a business case. There are any number of projects as a nurse that you might pick, and there are an enormous, unending number of research articles that have got a plethora of ideas for best practice improvements that you might want to implement in your clinical space. But consider this scenario where you're a midwife in a private hospital. And I've specifically picked a private hospital because it's a bit easier to see the core drivers and imperatives, the financial imperatives in a business case for a fully fledged for-profit organisations with shareholders and all of those sorts of things. So in this maternity unit that you're in, you do inpatient care. So you've got the labour ward and you manage postnatal patients, but it's generally focused around inpatient care. And this particular unit, for whatever reason, doesn't really do anything at all. And what they do, they don't do very well in terms of outpatient education. So antenatal classes, breastfeeding classes, parenting, those sorts of things that have a real benefit in patient outcomes. They don't do them, or they don't do them very well. So there's absolutely no idea that you as the midwife in this particular ward in a hospital can talk under wet cement about the benefits of what that antenatal and postnatal education might do. So, but frankly, the research that demonstrates patient outcomes isn't enough. Just because they say it's great for patients doesn't necessarily mean that it's the right thing to do for the organisation. Research is excellent at demonstrating that, and you could argue that the research demonstrates that an RN ratio and patient ratio of 1:1 is going to benefit the patient. They are definitely going to get excellent patient care when the ratio is 1 nurse to 1 patient, but it's going to collapse our health system. So patient benefits alone and research simply isn't enough. So for this organisation, how are you going to get them to see the benefits to the patient of these outpatient education programs into this service that's core business is inpatient care? The answer to that question is by exploiting the pain points. And I'll get into what that actually means soon, but that's actually how you go about building that business case. But we'll just have a quick look about where we are in the project management phase. So we talked in the last webinar about the project management phases, and it's important to understand where we sit when we're starting to write this business case in the project that we're going to undertake for this postnatal education rollout, about where we are in that. In that webinar, we talked about 8 things you're likely to do. And they're things like design your solution, define what you'll do in terms of your deliverables, who does what, that's your work breakdown structure, prepare your time, chunk up your project into segments of planning and then implementation and a trial and then your evaluation phase. You need to work out who's going to do what with your project team. You need to prepare a project initiation document, so that everybody knows what you're hoping to achieve. You assess your risk and you start telling people. So they're the sort of 8 large chunks of what you're going to do when you're running a project. And for this project, we're really in the second part of defining what you'll do. In your own head, you've defined your solution. You've got your inpatients and you're in your maternity ward, and you realise that there are 4 key patient education programs that are essential and that most other units do, that standard practice, and are going to have excellent patient benefits to this particular niche group of patients. So in your head, you've got a design of your solution. Now you're trying to work out exactly what you will deliver, and the devil is in that detail. And that first phase is where we're at in terms of writing a business case. It's right at the very beginning. And it's really the document that will set your project management for later. When you're writing your project initiation document to who's doing what, and your project plan to map out your phases, is going to be based on this document being the business case, because it's the starting document for everything. And it's definitely a document that you live by the sword, die by the sword. Whatever you put in this is your promise. So you're going to do X for Y. And if you change that later, then it has significant impacts to the way in which the project management runs. So it's incredibly important to get this starting block document correct. Put simply, this is the document that asks the question, and it's the decision makers who are going to give you the answer. If you've ever seen the show on Channel 10, the Shark Tank, where business owners come in with their idea for their invention, and they give a couple of minutes about that idea and why it's a cracker of an idea, the sharks pull it apart and then they say yes or no. I was watching that show recently, and there was this one person who came in who just couldn't get their information across and had nothing like the information, the breadth and depth of the information that they needed to get their good idea. Very passionate about their idea, was going to deliver good outcomes, but they really didn't have the information that these sharks needed. So she walked away after not being able to deliver the information, with all of the sharks passing on what was actually a really excellent idea. This business case is exactly the same. You have a brief window to capture the interest of your investor, your shark, and in this particular instance, it's the hospital board or the hospital executive, and you want to do what's best for your patients, and so do they. But they are burdened with a little bit more than you, in terms that they have to do it while balancing contestability. They have to, is this best practice project against the next best practice project going to offer more benefits to more patients? This is a situation for a hospital executive where they have to do make an assessment, because the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. And if you don't provide a compelling enough argument, then your idea to bring about this best practice is going to be dead in the water before you even start. So that's one of the major benefits about building a business case. It's about getting decision maker support. Writing a business case can sometimes feel like a galactic waste of time and simply a matter of raging bureaucracy. And I think most nurses, when they say you'd have to write a business case for that, would just be stopped dead in their tracks and go, oh, no. But this is where you have the opportunity to actually really get some momentum about some of the things that you've got to do. And you've got to have it in such that apples can be compared with apples, and it flattens language so anyone can understand it. The fact is that by doing this, you're actually doing a lot of other things at the same time. Primarily, you're going to be making a robust argument that stands the test of criticism and why you're asking for it. But one of the most unbelievable things that will happen is that you will actually gain clarity around what is going to happen in your project. As you work through and we'll talk about the anatomy of a business case in a moment, but as you work through this anatomy of a business case, you're actually going to come up against things that you hadn't thought of before, because it makes you really think it through. So you're going to go from a vague notion of we're going to deliver 4-ish post antenatal and postnatal classes to patients, But now you go, as you work through, you're going to start to get some real meat on that, and you're really going to get some ideas that are going to crystallise. And you're going to come across the major stumbling blocks as well. So you're going to get some clarity, but you're going to come across the fact that there are genuine problems and potential teething problems and barriers to the way in which you have to deliver this. And you have to think those through before you present this document to anyone. So you're going to come across those, and you're going to work through those situations as you work through this process. And that is really invaluable. Or half the work for your broader project management is going to be done by having this thought now rather than later. So you're going to have vastly thrashed out what you're going to do in your project as a result of going through this whole exercise of going through a business case. And it will have started to take a lot more shape in your mind. You're going to have, in terms of your project, when we looked at things like your work breakdown structure and the project initiation document and all the things that you need for a project management, you'll have actually intuitively thought about, because this is really like a walkthrough. You're going to have to have thought about who's who in the zoo in this, and you'll by default have identified your key stakeholders, and you're going to identify the parts of this process that you don't really know anything about, which is natural. But now you're going to identify what experts that you're going to need to engage in this process. You'll have visualised the reality, and therefore even the physical things, as you actually visually picture presenting these antenatal classes to these pregnant women, you'll actually be thinking, that's not going to happen into the ward, is it? Can't happen in room 16. So you're going to actually have a mental picture about the fact that you need things and you need people, and you're going to start fleshing that out as well. And so therefore a budget is going to take shape. And you're going to know where this idea is weak and where it's strong. And so you're going to have already done in part of your risk analysis about where your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats are. And you're going to know this project like no one else. And so you can talk about it expertly. And so therefore your communication plan has already started to form. So having said where the business case fits in the big scheme of things and why we're doing it, then now it's really about working through the anatomy of what this business case is going to look like. And we're going to do that by using our maternity, our midwife, working through, and she feels really, really passionately about getting these classes up and running. Every business case that you do is going to be different, and the level of detail required is going to be different as well. What you need to put into a business case for antenatal classes is going to be vastly different from what you need to put into a $20 million building program for expansion. And also most organisations have a template for a business case that they want, and it covers everything that they really need to know for their particular context. So governments will have it, which will be very different from a not-for-profit organisation, which again will be very different from the way in which a for-profit hospital is going to operate, and as well how a community-based health service is going to look and want in their business case, as well as aged care. So all of those drivers are going to be really, really different, and therefore the business case is going to be different. But generally speaking, the anatomy largely follows these sort of components that you have to work through. So the first thing that you need to do is the executive summary. It's kind of like the start of a journal article where you get everything you need to know in that part of the documents, so you can get a snapshot of what you're going to be reading about for the rest of the document. So you're going to summarise the key points, and everything that you have to say is going to be there in a succinct way. This is where the decision makers are going to read first. They're going to scan it to see if there's anything interesting and whether they need to read more. If there isn't anything compelling in this executive summary, then the whole document is going to get thrown on the corner of the desk where it'll be found 6 months later after goodness knows what. In a way, this is the most important part of the document, and it's likely that every executive member has made the 80% of the decision about yes or no about this particular project that you're proposing by the time they've read the summary. The rest of the document, if they read past the executive summary, is really to find answers to the few questions that remain to confirm whether they're going to say yay or nay. For our patient education, then this is where you're going to sell the patient benefits, of course, but actually where you need to exploit the pain points, which I alluded to before. So I think it's a good time to really talk about what I mean by those pain points, because our clinical nurse specialist midwife has thought about two people's pain points and two people's only, and that's the nursing staff's pain point and the patient's. But there are a lot of other stakeholders in this game that have a part to play, and we need to get around the headspaces of those people, because it's the key to getting a business case across the line. So let's talk about the players in our situation here and what they care about. So of course, the patient is the obvious one, but the patient doesn't always know what they want. It's a bit like the Rolling Stones, that you get what you need and not what you want. And that's often what nurses do with patients, is that they've read a journal article about a best practice and a project or a model of care that they want to implement, and they know that it's best for the patient, but the patient has absolutely no idea that they need that. No idea at all. When they're given that, or when they experience that difference, then they might recognise it, or their outcomes are different and we can measure that. But in terms of what the patient's pain point, what is actually their problem, them getting this model of care or the best practice is something that they have no idea about and will never ask for. So when you think about the patient, then there's one thing to think about with the patient outcomes, but there's also a context to think about them, and maybe it's useful to replace the word patient and with the term consumer group. And that makes you start thinking about, you don't always get what you want, you get what you need. We're giving them what we need by doing this, but we also need to give them what they want. So from a consumer group point of view, what do they want? And I think for a private hospital delivering inpatient maternity services, then those women are probably going to be on average 30 to early 40s. They're going to be highly educated with an income we know of probably over $100,000 a year, because that's when you have to get private health insurance. And they're going to be demanding a patient experience, a certain level of patient experience. And so when they come into, and they've got choices about which area to go and have their baby in, and so if they can have it at Hospital X or have it in Hospital Y, what they want is a patient experience. And so for a pain point for them, if their experience is very clinical and very hospital-y, then that's not really what they want. And so for my antenatal classes that you want to get up, their pain point is wanting patient experience. They want to be around other women that are having babies. They want lots of value adds is what they want for this particular consumer group. So that's something that you can say for your antenatal class. We're giving them an experience. We're giving them a social network. We're giving them this, people, they're going to come together for these antenatal classes and they're going to be friends well and truly after they have their babies, and we're making communities. That consumer group is going to want that. That's their pain point. The other group, of course, are the nurses in terms of the players in this picture. And they want best practice. To see patients being cared for in a way that is less than it should be is not who we are and what we're about. So building a business case about servicing our pain points should be pretty easy. It's something you shouldn't have to spend a lot of time thinking about. It should be intuitive. It's the other players in this game that you have to think more broadly about. For the VMOs, for the doctors in this for these privately insured patients, then they want repeat customers. They want their patients to come in, have a baby with them, have such a great experience, and that they love their obstetrician so much that they come and have baby number 2, 3 and beyond again with them. And if they can get and there's a whole part of that segment, their service delivery, that they control in their rooms, but they can't control the hospital experience. So they'll go to the best hospital that they can. So their pain point is saying, I want these women to come back to me to have another baby. And if the hospital is substandard, then I'll have to go to hospital Y and stop coming to hospital X, because that's their pain point. They want the best hospital. So you need to start thinking about in this particular scenario, that's their pain point. And you need to build that into your argument in this particular business case about the fact that the surgeons need this. The surgeons are asking for this, and that's part of their service delivery model. So, when we're meeting our key customers' requirements by offering these pre and postnatal education sessions. But then we think about the hospital executive. They're a stakeholder in this, obviously, and certainly a very prevalent one, because they're going to be coughing up the cash for it. And we have to think about what their pain point is. And one of their biggest pain points is VMO retention. If that surgeon does say, your hospital is substandard and I'll have to take my business elsewhere, and 3 or 4 of the surgeons do that, then they put that hospital into a significant amount of trouble. So ensuring that you've thought about, that part, and like you can say to the hospital, well, by providing these antenatal classes, then we're increasing VMO retention. Shareholders' pain point is that they need this business to be a going concern. The shareholders in the large for-profit private players in this country have invested money in this. So they want to know that patients are coming, patients are happy, and that the organisation is going to be financially viable into the future. So having happy people and happy doctors and happy patients is absolutely quintessential for them. And of course the board, for their pain point, when they read this executive summary, then their pain point is they want a hospital that is safe and that is a going concern and financially viable into the future as well. So they want a customer survey. They want customer satisfaction in the 90%, not in the 60%. And is this a platform for you to be able to do it? And that's what needs to be seen in this executive summary, is that for every one of those players that is going to be reading this document, then are you going to satisfy? So when the consumer groups reads your business case, are they going to see what they need for their pain point? And what about the doctors? Are they going to see what they need in that document? And the hospital executive as well, and the board and the shareholders. And if you can cater to those other than just the nursing pain points of, I think we should be delivering best practice, but you can also service everybody else's pain points, then you're going to have an executive summary that people want to read on to the meat of the document and find out more about that. So that's what we need to do. So if we are going to get them past that executive summary and we've serviced their pain points, then they're going to read the background. The background is the issue or the opportunity. And nurses generally think about things, generally across the board, in a very problem-based way. It's how we're built to think. It's our nursing diagnoses methodology. We think this patient has a risk of poor integrity as a result of their immobilisation, or that their patient is at risk of fall because of X, Y, and Z. We're very problem-based thinkers, which is an excellent way to think for a business case, because it's about what problem are you solving, and that's what background is all about. What is useful in this part of the document is not necessarily think about what problem exists, but what problem are you solving, or what opportunity are you going to resolve this pain point for your patients. So when I talk about each of those players, then most broadly, they're going to read about the fact that no education then means that the patient is at risk of failing to breastfeed successfully, or there's a higher elective caesarean rate due to lack of education, or perhaps their length of stay is longer because they're not educated enough to go home, or perhaps their infection rates are higher because they don't have the education to manage their caesarean section wounds, or whatever it is that's in the best practice. Then they're the facts of what the problem is, but what problem are you solving? For the consumer group, you're solving the problem of wanting them to have a good patient experience. They're going to have word of mouth, they're going to have higher patient experience, they're going to have their expectations met, they're going to talk on social media about how fabulous the hospital was because you over-delivered what they had expected from the service, and that consumer group is going to walk away very happy because they were well educated and they had a good experience. The nurses are going to be delighted because they're going to be delivering their best practice that they hope to. But the doctors are going to be happy because the patients are happy and they're going to come back and say, I loved having my baby with you. Because the ultimate experience is the hospital experience for women that are having babies in an inpatient setting. So they're going to most remember their birthing experience and they're going to go back to their doctor and say, I wouldn't go anywhere else. You know, when I had my baby, it was X, Y, and Z. And you're solving that by this background, on the background of what problem are you solving. The discussion is where we move into the devil in the detail. There are a lot of approaches, and this is probably the most significant difference in the business case for when you're writing it for antenatal classes as opposed to a $20 million expansion project, is what gets included in the discussion and the level of information that might be included in that. But you're going to include things in here like what are the objectives, what's the scope of your project, what assumptions, what's your SWOT analysis, what's the cost benefit, and how are you going to evaluate it. And so once your players in your picture have read the exec summary, moved on, they now understand what problem you're solving. Now you're going to get into how you're solving the details and nuts and bolts of that. And this is where every single answer to all of the stalls, excuses and objections that your decision makers are going to have are likely to throw forward, then you need to answer them here. So you need to actually really think about those players and what their pain points are and how they're going to stall, make an excuse or object to this project. And all of those need to be answered in the discussion section of this business case. So when you're talking about objective and scope, then you need to talk about what you're delivering using the SMART guidelines, so specific, measurable, realistic and time framed. If you just say we're going to deliver patient education, it doesn't really detail exactly, very specifically or in a time framed, measurable manner what that means. So in here you need to deliver the design of your solution in very specific forms. You're going to deliver 4 programs of antenatal and postnatal programs that are going to be ready to deliver in 6 months, and we will deliver them to this particular group of our patient mix in this setting. And so that is a very specific way of detailing what your objective is and the scope of that project. Scope's important to think about because whatever you put in this document means that you're stuck with it for the rest of the project. So it's live by the sword, die by the sword. If you say you're going to deliver 4 and you get approval to roll out 4 programs and then you secretly actually had every intention of rolling out 10, but of course the resources that are required are going to be 2.5 times and the implementation of it is going to be 2.5 times longer as well, then your project is going to fail and there's going to be a lot of people in the background going, why are we doing all of these extra projects? I thought we were just doing 4. So it's important to really think through what you're doing here. Assumptions is something that you describe here. This is what you've assumed to be true. So you need to detail these. You've assumed that the hospital is still interested in delivering the maternity ward and not intending on closing it in 6 months. You've assumed that the patient numbers are going to stay the same. You've assumed that doctors who are currently working in the hospital will continue to work in the hospital. You need to spell out all the assumptions because that will trigger a critical conversation now rather than midway through your project. So there's no point in saying, but how could I know that that doctor was leaving when that particular surgeon or obstetrician was absolutely critical to the success of this program? If you've assumed it, then you need to state it so that everyone can make an assessment about things that you may not necessarily know about. So it will trigger some checks and balances along the way. You'll also in the discussion explore your SWOT analysis, so your strengths and your weaknesses, your opportunities and your threats. So in terms of strengths, why is it that you think that your team would be good at delivering this education? It's probably because you have a disproportionately experienced team with some nurse practitioners or a couple of midwives who have worked privately and some midwives that have worked in a rural and remote setting, and they come with some really unbelievable skills. Why are you not strong? What are some obvious problems in the delivery? Perhaps it's because you're already quite short-staffed. You've got a high level of skills, but there's actually not many of them. So you're already stretching resources to cover the inpatient services. So how are you going to then stretch those to deliver the outpatient services? Opportunities. This is what you sort of brought into thought already in terms of the background. In what are you hoping to achieve? What's the opportunity? And really incredible opportunity to restate again each player's pain point and how you're going to serve to satisfy that. So for your hospital executive, you're going to have a much higher customer satisfaction rate, and you're going to have shorter length of stay, and you're going to have better educated patients, so they're going to be more successful at breastfeeding, and you're going to have less readmissions. Whatever it is for each of those groups, so you're going to have high doctor retention because you're actually getting them what they wanted so that they can deliver a better service to their patients as well. And then there's, for the SWOT analysis, there's the threats. Perhaps the public hospital down the road is already doing it on a very large publicly funded budget, and so you have to compete to get those patients. Or maybe the private hospital down the road is thinking about doing the same, and you've heard that on the grapevine. Or there are some private midwives in business that they were a business threat to the service that you want to provide to your patients that are coming to you. Or perhaps the private obstetricians are employing their own nurse educators to do a part of their service, therefore depleting your numbers. So external things to consider is incredibly important to put into that segment as well. There's a part where you talk about the cost benefit. So the costs, which we'll talk about shortly, but what are the benefits? For $50 per patient, when you will educate them and get what? Reduced readmission rate, reduced length of stay perhaps, reduced ED presentations, a considerably increased customer satisfaction score, you'll get repeat business. What is it that each of these players are going to get for their money? And then evaluations, that needs to be in this discussion as well. How are you going to know that when you are getting a readmission rate is because of what you're doing? Or a reduced length of stay, or a reduced ED presentation? How do you know that because you did patient education, then you resulted in that? How are you going to link an increased customer satisfaction score with what you did? How will you know that a woman has returned to your hospital to have her second baby because of the experience she had the first time, and it wasn't just because it was super close to home? Those are the sorts of things that you need to explore. And that's what I mean when I say answer all the stalls, excuses and objections that your key decision makers are going to likely put forward, so that they can read that and move through those counters that they're going to have. Then you're going to explore your options. So really I recommend you have 3 options. And if you've just got one option, then that's going to be a bit of a problem. The human brain likes to have choice, and the human brain doesn't enjoy ultimatums particularly. So when you give 3 options, they feel like your decision makers, your players, have made the choice. You've put forward a menu of possibilities and they chose one. But when you just give one, then really you're saying it's my way or the highway. It's all or nothing. This is what I want to do, and if I don't get that, I don't want to do it at all. So it's a really good opportunity to actually twist that and be a little bit manipulative about it for what you're doing. So really option 1 is your perfect solution. It's everything. It's the gold standard for what you want, all the bells and whistles. And then you've got a fallback position. And you truly think about, if I couldn't have everything that I wanted, what would I be happy to take out? and then offer that as my fallback so that at least I am delivering patient education, just maybe not for now the way I wanted it. And then option 3 is the do nothing option. That's a really important one because all the way through this document, your players and your decision makers are sitting back thinking, I don't see why I have to do something. I might do nothing. So it's a very real possibility that they'll do nothing. So you may as well get it out onto the table and say, do nothing is an option. You could do nothing. But what you've got to do is hammer home the pain points and make them understand what they're risking if they do nothing. So if they do nothing, your VMO retention is likely to be lower, that your dwindling patient numbers that we're getting in the maternity year late are likely to continue as patients go to St. Wherever's down the road, that your readmission rate of X% may continue to increase as per the trends for the last 6 months, or your length of stay is going to increase for your caesarean section when you could deliver a length of stay of 3 days. Or whatever it is that each of their players, their pain is going to be increased or continued by the do nothing option. So that's incredibly important to say, if you do compromise and do nothing, then what's that going to look like for you? The next section is your recommendations. So you've done a lot of hard work by the time you get here, and now it's just putting forward what you think should happen. And obviously your option A, your gold standard, is going to be the one that you're going to put forward. And you might think, why am I bothering putting the recommendation in when it's obvious I've put the options? But when your decision makers open this document, they're going to do one of two things. They're going to look at the executive summary and then go straight down to the recommendation. And then if they're interested, then they'll continue to read. This is not a document that gets read in a linear manner. They read the exec, they go down to the recommendations, they have a look at the total cost, make some sort of decision about whether they're going to continue reading or not, and then work through the rest of the body of the document. So working out, making it very, very clear about what you think should happen is incredibly important to highlight that so that they've got a broad understanding from the beginning as they, in a non-linear movement, move around this document to then start at the beginning and work through it. If they're going to do that, then they're 80% towards the yay, which is where you want them to be. Then you've got a couple of appendices where you put whatever documents that are relevant for whatever you're putting forward. So they might be your evaluation tools, or they might be your research summaries, or perhaps your reference list about what you're basing this evidence-based practice on. A good one is letters of support from key doctors. Exploit that. The decision makers have got a real pain point with their doctors and doctor retention, so formalising it by getting the key doctors to write a little letter of support for what you're putting forward. Nothing, you can say it until you're blue in the face that doctors want this, but it doesn't quite have the same power as when they say it for themselves. So put that in the document. You could run a mini survey with the appropriate permissions, or seek informal feedback from patients, or you could attend your consumer group committee and ask them the question directly about what you think about this, and then put that feedback as part of one of the appendices of your document. Whatever supports it more and more to get the decision makers to think, we're mad if we don't get this done. And then of course the last one that is an important appendix is going to be the budget. This is the part when most people think about a business case, they think that largely about the budget. But despite popular belief, a business case is not a financial document. It's where you need to put some thought around some money, and you certainly need to put forward a budget, but it is not a financial document. And if this is not part of what you know how to do, and I would say for most of us it isn't, then you get the hospital accountant to help you with it. You get the experts that you need. If you were delivering a solution for mothers as part of the prevention for postnatal depression and you're a midwife, you're not a mental health nurse. So you don't know everything that there is to know about being a mental health nurse or delivering that solution. So the best thing to do is get an expert in that area and help you. And in the same way you would do that with the budget. And the accountants are just delighted to do something other than preparing the monthly financial reports, where they actually get to prepare something that has a real impact on real people. So they're always delighted to come and help you with that. So when you think about what you're going to do with the budgets, then whatever you do for whatever best practice project that you're doing, you're going to need people and you're going to need things. And so you just have to list them. What people do you need to deliver this? Probably midwives. How many? For how long? At how much? It's a pretty simple formula. One midwife delivers 2 hours of education, for example, with 1 hour of preparation at $50 an hour. So each session is probably going to cost you $150 in human resources. But what about things? Do you need a venue, or can you actually do it in the ward? Do you have some multi-purpose area where you could deliver that? If you can't do it on the ward, then how big of a venue and how much is that going to cost you? You bring some places and you find out how much. Are you going to need to provide catering? How much is that? Do you need chairs, a TV, audio-visual equipment? What about learning visual aids, some mannequins to demonstrate, or other visual learning aids to ensure that the patient education is delivered with success? What about charging the patient? Is it free? Does it have to be? Will the market pay? And if they will, then what can you do to benefit your patient population that you couldn't have done if you didn't charge them? Perhaps the charging issue, whether you charge patient, formulates part of your option 2, that your fallback position. You tweak the things and the people that you need to deliver the gold standard, and the bronze standard is the section 2. So perhaps you take out the frequency or the number of programs you deliver, or you charge the patient, or you tweak option 2 to make it a more financially viable offer for the decision makers that are reading it. It's simply a matter of whacking in a spreadsheet and attaching it to the back of the business case, and that's all the financial elements that are required in this business case. It's important to make reference into costs when you're dealing in the discussion part of your document, when you're talking about cost benefit, but other than that, there's not a lot from a financial point of view that's required after that. After you get that, you submit it to the decision makers and they say yes or no. And this business case is going to formulate the backbone of your project, and you are going to tweak it and go back to it and return to it and ultimately deliver on your promise. Because a business case is simply that. It is just the promise of, if you give me X, I will give you Y. Which is why it's so important to think about, what everybody else other than the patient and what the nurses need or want for this to happen. They care about a lot of other things and have a lot of other pain points, and so you need to make a promise that you're going to help that, and so now you need to deliver on what that promise is. Looking at the project management webinar that I've done and the change management would be a good next port of call in terms of the where to from here. But I have put some resources on my website at that address there, so nursemanagerhq.com/business case, where I've got these slides, this audio recording, and I've also put a couple of templates so you can see what the range of business cases might look like in terms of the complexity of the documents compared to the level of change that you're implementing or the project that you're implementing. But ultimately, this is the sort of the anatomy and the scaffolding of what a business case might look like.
Nicole, thank you very much for a very, very interesting presentation.
My pleasure.
If you are attending this webinar live and you would like to ask Nicole a question, just click on the question mark icon and type your question into the little square box that will appear and hit send, and that will go through to Nicole. Nicole, a business case does sound a little complex, but the reality is, unless you're prepared and go through the steps, when you get to put it to the people who make those decisions, unless you've got the framework, it's very difficult for them to work out what you're trying to articulate.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the concept of a business case sounds quite intimidating. But if we can't, it's not too dissimilar to a journal article, really. And if we can't really articulate why it's beneficial, then it's probably not the right best practice for us or our patients. So it's incredibly important, and not everyone is going to understand it. So it's a good way of, neutralising that.
No, exactly right. And certainly when you talk to nursing colleagues, the frustration for nurses is that, what appears so obvious to us to address an issue isn't necessarily obvious to the rest of the world.
Yes.
And I think and the business case model assists us to be able to streamline those thoughts, because what you actually start out with may turn out to be something like a totally different beast once you've gone through all the checks and balances.
Yes, exactly. And every ward, every patient population, every organisation, they're different. And even though broadly we deliver the same care irrespective, there are nuances to your niche that are unique, and you need to find how you're going to fit things. And taking a carbon copy of a best practice model out of a journal article and just whacking it into your setting isn't necessarily something that's going to work. And the business case does give you that opportunity to flesh out your nuances for your patient population.
Yeah, no, exactly. And again, as Nicole identified, those resources are available from her website, and I would recommend a visit to there.
Thanks, Sue.
Today we've been listening to Nicole Nash-Arnold from Nurse Manager HQ, and we've been looking at the intricacies of the business case. Nicole, thank you very much again for your time. To everyone who's listening, I wish you an absolutely exceptional day, and I look forward to seeing you online at another webinar very soon. Goodbye.